Good morning, Year 8. I hope you've had a lovely week. This is your video for week 5, is your solutions to the 20 questions, okay? So make sure you mark your answers as you go along, and any that you didn't quite get, make sure you correct them as you go as well. So for the first one then, so it's factorising again. So we need to figure out the highest common factor between 9 and 6. So what's the highest number that goes into both of them? And we'll pop that on the outside of the brackets. So in this case, it's the number 3. So we'll pop that on the outside of the brackets. Now we know that whatever's on the outside of the brackets, we times whatever's on the inside. So how do I get from 3 to 9? Well, I times 3 by 3. So now I've got my 9. So to get to 6, I would obviously have to times it by minus 2. So 3 times minus 2 equals minus 6, but I want the x as well. So there we go. My final answer to that one would be 3, open brackets, 3 minus 2x, closed brackets, okay? Now for the next one, we've got to do the same thing. So we've got to figure out what is the highest number that goes into 30 and 42. So in this case, we would go with the number 6. So we'd have the 6 on the outside of the brackets. And then we're just going to make the rest of it work. So what do I have to set times 6 by to get to 30? Well, I've got to times it by a 5. But I've also got an x, okay? So 6 times 5x equals 30. So I know that that bit's correct. And then how do I get from 6 to 42? Well, I would times that by 7, okay? So I would add my 7, and then to test it, I can do 6 times 5x is 30x, and then I can do 6 times 7 is 42. So I know that my answer is correct. So on to the next one, we've got a squared times b times a squared times a, and I want to simplify this. So remember, if you've just got a b, you've got an imaginary 1 above it, or if you've got an a on its own, imaginary 1 above it. So now, when we times things with indices, we just add those indices together. So a squared times a squared would be a to the power of 4. But then we've also actually got an extra a here, which I've missed. So imagine that 4 was never there. So we've now got a squared times a to the power of 1. So we'd actually have a to the power of 5. So let's write our 5 here. And then we've just got the 1b, so we pop our b here. Remember, we don't need the multiplication sign because we know that if the 2 are next to each other, we would multiply, okay? So for the next one, we've got a to the power of 4 times b with an imaginary 1 there, and an annoying line again, times a to the power of 4 times b to an imaginary 1 there, okay? So this time we've got 2 lots of a, so we will have a to the power of 8, and we've got 2 lots of b, so it would be b to the power of 2. Okay, I've got rid of the line. So, on to the multiplication. So 3.7 times 2.6. So we can just write this one out. So we've got 3.7 times 2.6. Okay, so we'd have 6 times 7 equals 42. And we'd have 6 times 3 equals 18, but plus the 4 there, which would equal 22. Make sure we pop in our point. And then for the second one, we'll have our 0 here. So we'd have 2 times 7 equals 14. And then we'd have 2 times 3 is 6, plus the 1 is 7. So we'd have 74 there. So now we would just have to add those together. So if we added those together, we would get 9, 6, and then 2. And then we'd pop our decimal point in there, okay? Because if we were to estimate, for example, let's say we did, I don't know, 4 times 3 would equal 12, and actually therefore putting our decimal point in the closest place to that would be 9.62, which is our answer, okay? So for the next one, we've got a subtraction, so we've got 29.3 minus 6.7, okay? So just make sure they line up. So got another line, don't know why. So 7 from 3, we can't do that, so we're going to make that one into an 8 and this one into a 1 and a 3. So 7 from 13 is 6. Okay, 6 from 8 now is 2, and then imaginary 0, 0 from 2 is 2. So we should have a 22.6 for that one. So on to some addition of fractions, okay? So we're going to times the bottom two numbers together to get our common denominator. So 8 times 5 is 40. So I'll put that on the bottom of those two. Now this side we times by 5, so we can do that to the top as well. And this side we times by 8. So 5 times 5 is 25. And then 4 times 8 is 32. So we need to do 25 plus 32, which would be 57. So we would have 57 over 40. But that's not good. We don't want a top-heavy fraction, so we're going to make it into a mixed number. So we ask ourselves, how many of the bottom fit into the top? So only 1, and then I've got 17 left over. So it would be 17 over 40. So that'd be our final answer, 1 and then 17 over 40. So the next one is subtracting fractions, but it's the same principle, okay? So we do the bottom two numbers times together to get our common denominator. So 2 times 7 equals 14, so we'll pop that on the bottom of these two. This side we times by 7, so we can do that to the top as well, and this side we times by 2. So we've got 1 times 7 is 7, and we've got 2 times 3 is 6, okay? So then we've got 7 minus 6 on the top, so all we're left with is 1 over 14, and that's our final answer on that one. Okay, on to some sequences then. So it asks us to find the nth term for this one. So between 8 and 18, I've got 10. That's my difference. 18 and 28, I've got 10 and 10 again. Okay, so if I know my difference is 10, I write that first. Then I write the letter n. That refers to the number in the sequence. And then I ask myself, how do I get from the number I've got here to the first number in my sequence? Well, to get from 10 to 8, I minus 2, okay? And that's my final answer. So let's test it with, let's say, the third number in the sequence. So we pop our 3 in where the n is, because that's the number in the sequence we want to find. So we do 10 times 3 is 30, minus the 2 does indeed equal 28, so therefore we know that we are correct. Next one then, so what's the difference between these? Between 9 and 15, we've got 6. Between 15 and 21, we've got 6. And 6 again there. So we pop our 6 here with our n afterwards. And then I ask myself, how do I get from this number to the first number in my sequence? Well, to get from 6 to 9, I'm going to add 3, okay? Let's test that on, I don't know, the fourth number in the sequence. So pop our 4 where the n is. We'll do 4 times 6 equals 24, and then we'll add the 3, which does indeed equal 27. So good news, I know that I am correct. Next up, we are dividing decimals by decimals, okay? So as I've said previously, the easiest way to do this is to times both of them by the same thing. So either 10, 100, or 1,000. So this time we're going to times them both by 10. So if I times them both by 10, I get 42 divided by 3, which is a much easier thing to do. So I just ask myself, how many 3's go into 42? And then obviously I would get the answer of 14. And that is the final answer, because it doesn't matter, as long as you've times both sides by the same, 10, 100, 1,000, then the answer is the same. So 4.2 divided by 0.3 equals 14. Now on to the next one, 14 divided by 1. Now when we divide anything at all by 1, we just get the same thing, because how many 14s fit in to 14? Well, how many ones fit into 14? Well, 14. So 14 divided by 1 is just 14. Okay, so we will do the other 8 answers in the next video. So make sure you tune into part 2, where we will have the final 8 answers.